Hi, my name is Korozjin. I play a ranger in Guild Wars 2, and the server that I'm on is Sea of Sorrows.
Well, hello and welcome everyone to another MMO Anthropology interview. You already know me as your host, Amarist, and this is Koro, right here. Uh, and as usual, what we do is I take someone into a world, in this case it's Guild Wars 2, and interview them in the virtual world, so to speak, on camera. And so everybody, I want to thank Koro for coming in here with me and answering some questions.
Not a problem.
So our first question is, so why did you choose Guild Wars 2 for this interview?
Guild Wars 2 is a game that I've grown extremely fond of just over the years. I started playing it quite some time ago, and I had quit playing it just because I tend to jump around from online game to online game. And I came back to it just because it's one of the few games that I actually come back to because I really missed the environment, just the players, the game itself, the lore, everything. I actually really missed it, so I came back and I started really enjoying it again.
Well, and speaking of environments, one of the things that I have everyone that I interview choose a location in the virtual world where they want to be interviewed in, and you picked an area in the region called Ascalon. And so, could you tell me a little bit about why you chose this location and what we're looking at, or what you find compelling?
Well, the reason why I chose it is because for people who are veterans of Guild Wars will know that Ascalon is the native homeland for the Char, and since my ranger is a Char, I figured I would look around for areas in which to do the interview. And I really liked this spot because it actually shows a few things, a few pieces of the lore that were really pivotal to whenever the Char actually retook the land back from the Ascalonians. Because there's a very, very long bloody history between the Char and the Ascalonians. And so you can see behind us there's the one of the remnants of the Searing. It's a giant meteor-like purple crystal.
With beams of light coming out of it, I can see.
Yes, a very, very pretty, but also very deadly crystal whenever it's falling upon you from the sky.
No kidding. Well, and there's also what appears to be like the ruins of a city silhouetted here.
The ruins are actually part of what the Ascalonians built to try to keep the Char out in order to... I'm talking about specifically the Great Wall.
Right.
The Great North Wall is what the Ascalonians tried to build to keep the Char out of the lands whenever they were actually divided and warring. So they were having a hard time trying to keep the Ascalonians from pushing them out. So they built the wall, and then everything was hunky-dory until the Char figured out they could just rain death upon them from above.
Right. So, I'm curious, do you have... You mentioned earlier that you jump around MMOs, so this question should be rather interesting. Do you have experience with other MMOs, and how do they compare to Guild Wars 2?
I have some experience with the Secret World and Terra especially. I have limited experience with World of Warcraft. I played it for a couple of days with a friend of mine. The Secret World was one that I actually played for quite some time, and I really, really enjoyed it. Mostly because the lore and the events and quests and stuff like that are all really interesting to me. Like, I really like the whole atmosphere of the game. It's very dark, kind of brooding, but it has a lot of intent and seriousness with how they take it, so it's really easy to get immersed, and that's one thing I liked about it. However, the flip side of that is it's kind of taxing to actually be that immersed in the lore, and it's all dark and brooding again, so it's just like, I kind of want to go back to something more lighthearted. And then Terra was really fun, but I think it was kind of in the middle of some growing pains, because if I remember correctly, I joined like 2 months before they switched over to the openly free system, or the free-to-play system. So there was a lot of changes that were going on, and it really wasn't fun to play by myself. And most MMOs I got into by playing with a friend, and Guild Wars 2 is actually no exception. But Terra I got into, and I really didn't find it quite as fun to play by myself. Like, it really didn't strike me as being fun enough to play on my own.
Yeah.
So I wound up dropping it. But Guild Wars 2, I actually wound up being fun to play both alone and with a party, because there's enough to do in the way that they do the instancing, the dungeons, the story, all of it is just so well done. It makes it really easy to transition between, single and group play, in my opinion.
Excellent. So that brings me to, what do you do on a regular day in Guild Wars 2?
Depends on what I'm in the mood for. Sometimes I will go to different areas that have dailies. So one of the big ones is world bosses, such as Tequatl. Mm-hmm. And, of course, there's a lot of other smaller ones, but Tequatl is one of the big ones that gives a really good chance at loot, and it actually gave me this sword that I have, which is an ascended weapon, which is one of the higher tier. It's the second highest tier weapon.
Hey, can you pull it out for us? Because I think it has an aura.
Yeah.
Yeah, there we go.
It has a corrupted aura. So that was actually one of the drops from Tequatl. It's one of the ascended weapons. And let's see, what else do I do? Right now I've been running the Silver Wastes and a little bit of Dry Top, because they're level 80 areas, so they're kind of like in-game kind of stuff. And so I've been doing that, trying to farm, get achievements, get the... specifically, there's the luminescent armor, so a lot of Guild Wars 2 players will be familiar with that. I've been trying to get towards that, but also get materials for crafting and whatnot.
As a little bit of a descriptor for people who are watching, the Silver Wastes and Dry Top are two very high-level zones that are distinguished primarily because they are full of dynamic events, that they are ever-changing, shifting maps that the players themselves can push forward or change what happens on the map by their interaction with it. And it's one of the things that Guild Wars 2 is well known for, is producing dynamic maps with events going on all the time. And both of them cycle. So no matter when you come into it, you can experience pretty much the entire array of events that occur on it, as long as you're willing to sit around, or, well, run around in it, not so much sitting in either of these maps, for like an hour or so. You can experience the full range.
Right, and that's actually a very good description of it.
Yeah. Good. I'm glad. So, before I move on to a question about how you play MMOs, I'm really curious about your character. Can you tell us a little bit about her and like what it is, what a ranger is, and how they play, and why you chose to be a ranger?
Well, the Rangers are known for one of their primary gimmicks, I guess you could say, is they have a pet. Mm-hmm. Here, I'll just pull up my pet. This is one of my main pets that I use. He is an ice drake, mm-hmm. and I've named him Land Salmon because he looks like a land salmon. Mm. But anyways, so the Rangers are known for having their pets, which you can control. You can send them off to attack enemies. But the main thing I use it for actually is to tank a lot of damage. Mm-hmm. So that lets me focus on doing important things in fights, which is really incredibly useful for dungeons and stuff like that. Because sometimes you'll be, especially with the way that Guild Wars 2 actually does its aggroing, because there's not really a way to say, hey, I'm over here, attack me. It tends to focus a lot of the really high damage players. So if you're playing, I like to play kind of a tanky high damage person, mm-hmm. Not tanky high damage, but like slightly tough but really still high DPS kind of a person.
Right.
And the pet lets me have a little bit more flexibility with how I can do damage, because I can assign it to take damage, and then I can dish out the damage.
Awesome.
So that's what I like about the Ranger class. Each class, for those who don't play Guild Wars, has a specific set of abilities, and you can cycle through those. And so my abilities that I have, I use mostly pretty much entirely for damage. One of them is a condition effect, which does damage over time. And then I have a couple of them that are buffs that do miscellaneous things like increase your damage output, increase your critical strike chance. One of them gives a one-time bonus to your first attack that gives you 150% increased damage, or no, 150% damage for your first strike.
Mm.
So I focus a lot on just doing damage output, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of other builds that also let you summon party buffs, which are useful for low levels things, but usually by the time you get to the end game, level 80 characters, a lot of people know how to stay alive, so you usually don't have to worry about the party so much, unless you're playing someone that specifically does party buffs like the Guardians.
So the next question is a little bit kind of practical or esoteric, I'd say. How do you use MMOs as entertainment differently than, say, reading a book, watching a TV show, or a movie?
Well, the reason why I like video games is because it lets you experience it in a way that's more interactive rather than it's being narrated to you. You get to have it narrated to you, but you also are a part of it because you are literally driving it forward. So that's one thing that I really like about it. Plus, the whole living story thing is just a fantastic part of Guild Wars because they let you, as a player base, they let the player base actually change the game, which is really fantastic. So that's one of the things I like so much about this.
Well, what is a good example, do you think, of how the players have changed the game through the living story in Guild Wars 2?
Well, those of us who have been playing for a while, I actually started before the whole Scarlet story arc, but the events surrounding Scarlet's invasion, or I should say incursion, into the Lion's Arch, most notoriously, literally shaped and wound up destroying Lion's Arch because of her actions. And so players were tasked with defeating her, and so that wound up actually shaping how the game is progressing, essentially, because of, people actually had to go in and defeat her, and so they chose to make that a part of the story, and so they actually chose to have an area become raised that they had to actually fight and defend.
Yes. Yeah, and right now, Lion's Arch is a disaster area that's slowly being rebuilt. It just recently became habitable, so to speak. So I'm curious about your interactions with the rest of the community. What would you say is the temperature of Guild Wars 2's community? Like, however you interacted with other people, friendly, hostile, what's it like?
In kind of a vacuum, say if I weren't comparing it to any other games, they're generally very receptive to, to help or to giving help, which is one thing that I really like. Like, a lot of players are generally very helpful if they have the knowledge. Granted, especially with the promotion they had going on recently, there's a lot of new players, so some of them do also need help. And I enjoy occasionally helping out new players, as long as they're, at least able to listen. which is sometimes an issue. I mean, it happens. Sometimes you just have no idea what's going on, and I've been there.
Right.
And occasionally I'm still there. But overall, like, a lot of the player base is really good. I have actually had very, very few experiences that were very negative with players in Guild Wars 2. And that's one thing that also drove me to come back to it was I remembered, it's like, man, I really miss actually having people I could play with that were, decent.
So also on the social front, do you have a guild, and how did you find them?
Yes, I have a guild. It's Furs, which is the tag is Furs. The name of the guild is Tail Swishers, which is a furry friendly guild. But I was actually introduced to it by a friend of mine, who was like, "Hey, you know a bunch of furry people. You should join a furry guild." And I'm like, "Okay, sure, whatever." And again, it's just a bunch of friendly people. There's really not many people I've met that I've had a problem with, which is fantastic, especially because for a while I was playing League of Legends. I know some of you who are watching at home immediately cringed thinking about the player base in League of Legends because of how terrible it is.
Yes.
And coming back to Guild Wars 2 from League of Legends is just a breath of fresh air. So...
So would you say that your part of your decision to join the guild that you've got has to do with your connection or interaction with, I think the proper term would be the furry fandom subculture? Like this
Yeah, furry fandom, furry community, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, so that led to an increased your desire to check out the guild and stay with them, or
Yeah.
okay.
The thing I like about guilds in Guild Wars 2 is that there are a lot of them that are extremely casual, and so you can kind of hop around. And also, there's the repping system where you can literally change which guild that you represent on the fly. So, for example, if you're doing different guild events, because for example, the first guild is mostly about or I should say, Tail Switchers.
Mm-hmm.
It's mostly about just having a large group of people that can kind of help each other.
Mm-hmm.
There's always people willing to help with, for instance, living story events and whatnot. And also, there's just friendly people to talk to.
Right.
But there are other guilds that specifically focus on different areas. So, for example, Tail Switchers is not very active with doing daily events constantly. Like some guilds, may have like 3 times a day that they go do, whatever, World v. World, PvP, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But they're more laid back about that. Mm-hmm. So what's nice is with the repping system, I can join another guild and then I can go hop on with them and say hop on their TeamSpeak and I can rep them and then go do PvP stuff or whatever. And then at the end of the day, I can come back and hang out with some of the people that I've made in this relatively smaller guild that I know a lot better because I've actually gotten to chat with them more.
Right. Okay, so I haven't got much time left in this interview, so I'd like to give you the last question that I give everybody, and that is, what is your favorite or most memorable experience from an MMO?
I hate to be so broad, but after thinking about it honestly, pretty much any story element to the Secret World. The Guild Wars 2 comes at a neck-bitingly close second.
Mm-hmm.
With its story elements, but as a whole, I cannot really pick out one particular thing in the Secret World that didn't really strike me.
Right. Well, do you have an example that you think would be worth relaying?
Unfortunately, no, because a lot of it's plot twist stuff.
Oh, okay, so it would all be spoilers.
Yeah, basically.
Okay, well, that's fine. So, and is that why you think the Secret World is one of your favorite or most memorable? Is it because of the nature of immersion, would you say?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, that and another thing that really struck me, the puzzles. I love the puzzles in the Secret World. Mm. For example, one of the puzzles, in order to complete the quest, you have to decode a message that is given to you only as a series of audible beeps in Morse code. And so they emphasize there's an in-game way to access a web browser because you routinely have to go to Google and look up how to do quests.
Wow.
Or look up different resources in order to solve puzzles, which is really, I like that kind of stuff. So that's another thing that really stuck out to me about that.
Okay. Well, that's all the time that I've got for this interview. Thank you so much for coming along and answering questions for us, Korozjin.
No problem. Yeah.
And of course, I have been Amarist, and this has been another MMO Anthropology interview. Thank you, everyone, for coming along. And we'll see you next time. Good night and good dreams.
Do you play online games? Do you have Skype? Then we'd love to interview you on Massive Online Anthropology. Join the fascinating thousands who've spoken about their online gaming experience and be the envy of all your friends. Or at least get the MMO Anthropology Geek Merit Badge. Sorry, no t-shirt. See you then!